is about 5 foot nothing and generally harmless looking. I have no idea what it is about being seemingly harmless, but it tends to attract a whole array of bad news. Don't believe me? Go ask a soft-spoken tiny girl who gives you the first impression of, isn't she just adorable? And more than likely, she'll have enough stories to make you worry about your sanity. This is compounded by my overall attitude of, I'll be sugar, rainbows, and sunshine, right up until you give me a reason not to. A job in retail makes the whole mess as fun as bamboo splinters under your fingernails. Whoever came up with the idea the customer is always right needs to be shot, resurrected, and shot again. That said, I'll do anything within the limits of my job for a customer. I like helping customers out. Most retail workers do. A little lesson is to be had here for those who have never worked in a service-based company. Most employees want to help you. Let them, and you'll both walk away from the encounter in a much better frame of mind. If they don't, you should ask yourself if it's a situation beyond their control. If the answer is even anywhere close to it might be, let them off the hook. I've seen too many retail employees get a look of dread on their face when something goes wrong, as I myself am out being a customer. It bothers me every single time, because I know what it's like to think, great. Now I'm going to get yelled at and called names for something that isn't my fault. Or if they're mad enough, they might even call in about me. And then my boss will be wondering what in God's name I'm doing. You know what said employee can do about it? Sit there and take it, while apologizing for your inconvenience. But I digress. I work as an overnight supervisor to a 24-hour drugstore. We get plenty of creepy people in. Being a fair-sized city with only 2 24-hour pharmacies in town, I have some really weird stories. Maybe I'll tell a few more at a later date. The evening of this particular incident had me working on a Saturday night with 2 other front-end employees. Saturday nights mean ad tags. We overnighters, the few, the lucky, are the ones stuck with this joyful job. It means 10 hours of monotony, and a lot of back and forth around the store. Usually the nights pass with some regulars, some meth heads, drunks, some regular meth heads, drunks, and the occasional sick person, or person with a sick loved one at home. Most intoxicated persons are in and out like a flash, but I've noticed the more out of their wits they are, the higher the potential for creepy is. So you learn to watch the ones with nervous twitches. It was about 1:30 a.m. when this taller, wiry man walked into the store. His dark brown hair was cropped pretty short, and he was dressed fairly casually. I didn't even realize his presence in the store until the cashier for the night, Daniel, came up to me and muttered something about the weird guy wandering around the front of the store. Daniel is middle-aged, but mischievous and crotchety are 2 very apt descriptions of him. You never quite know when he's just stirring the pot, so I searched the guy down to see what was bothering Daniel. I had been thinking it was more likely that he'd noticed something strange about the guy, and was worried about shoplifting. This would not be the first, or last time his so-called shoplifter turned out to be some poor, exhausted father or husband sent out to get cold medicine. I found him pacing along the front wall, and asked if he needed any help in my cheeriest customer service voice. The moment he turned around, I froze. The man radiated subdued violence. It surrounded him like an aura of menace. I couldn't pinpoint what was bothering me. The weirdly still expression maybe, or the way he was standing. He was unnaturally tense during my whole experience with him, like he was ready to go off at the first provocation. Truthfully, I still haven't quite figured it out. He was just off enough to send up red flags just looking at him. Immediately uncomfortable, I was all too happy when he muttered, "No, I'm just looking." I never have figured out how to gracefully exit the situation when a customer has nothing left to say to you, but still stands there staring, which feels almost expected, even if it's not. After a minute or so of avoiding meeting his eyes, I told him my usual line of, "Alright, well, let us know if you need anything." I backed into the aisle I'd emerged from and hurried off to busy myself with more ad tags. Daniel could keep an eye on him if he felt like it. Dude was scary and I was the only female on shift. No, thank you. They don't pay me enough. It's not long before I start to feel like I'm being watched. And creepy suspect number 1 is looking at the top of the aisle, staring. I finish all of the tags in line for that aisle, and I'm relieved when I have to move across the store for others in a different section. Again, a few moments pass, and that weird prickly feeling hits me, and he's at the end of the aisle, staring right at me. I ask for a second time if I can help him find anything, and he pretends to busy himself with some vitamins he picked up at random. He gave a creepy grin and told me again that he was just looking. Yeah, sure. I just bet you were. This continues for another half hour or so until I find myself heading up to the front to ring up a customer. I had no idea where Daniel was, but it didn't matter. I was grateful for the distraction. That was until I noticed Creeper following me up to the register, still staring. I conducted the transaction as quickly as possible, and after a few too many nervous glances in my creepy's direction, the customer took off like someone had lit him on fire. I decided to go outside for my lunch break. It was cold and I thought maybe, since Mr. Creeper didn't have a particularly warm-looking coat on, he'd leave me alone. I searched out one of my co-workers and let him know my intentions. Walked out, and stepped outside and into my car. Now normally I try to avoid smoking in my car. I've never liked the way it stinks up a car, but desperate times, desperate measures. I locked the car doors and rolled down the window just far enough to fit my cigarette through to ash it. I picked up a book, turned to the page I'd left off on, and settled in. A few paragraphs later, I heard someone bang on my window. I jumped and looked up. Guess who? That's right, Mr. Creepy. He grinned at me in what I'm sure was supposed to be a sheepish fashion, but it came out more Norman Bates, if you know what I mean. I again asked him if I could help him, and he said he'd been looking for something in particular that he'd like my help with. I told him firmly that there were 2 other employees in the store that would have to help him. I was off the clock. He frowned, and after a moment of me pointedly ignoring him in favor of tensely not being able to concentrate on my book, he went back inside. My lunch break ended, and I still hadn't seen him come back out. I hurried inside, clocked in, and called the other shift supervisor, Mark, into the office. I explained the situation and asked him if he could go deal with the dude. Mark sighed, nodded, and went to talk to the guy. I busied myself in the office with some training sessions I'd been putting off for a while. Mark came back inside the office, wearing a very bewildered look. I raised an eyebrow, and he sat down. That guy was really weird. Weird is not quite the adjective I'd use. What did he say? He wanted to talk to you again. I told him he had other things you needed to be doing, that I'd be happy to help him. That agitated him. You thought he was freaky beforehand? He visibly shuddered, and I raised an eyebrow again. He asked if I knew what time you got off or where you lived. The fuck? Exactly. I told him we were legally obligated not to share such information, and that if he wasn't going to buy anything he needed to leave. Then he left. I followed him out just in case. He was looking around your car until he noticed I'd followed, and then he got in his car and left. I decided I wasn't going to stick around to see if he was coming back, and noped out the rest of my shift. Shortly after, my store set up a guard contract with the local police department, and I haven't seen him since. I've tried writing this once already, but it was quite long, and I hadn't even gotten to the part yet where I tried going no contact with my stalker, and he flipped his lid. I deleted it, and this will be my attempt to say everything without being so long-winded. Okay, background information. This situation began in 2004 and seemingly ended in 2011. I am female, live on the west coast of the US, and in 2002, I converted to charismatic evangelical Christianity. This will be an important bit of information, because it's how I met the guy. In 2003, I made an online friend named Shannon. Shannon and I had a lot in common: traumatic childhoods, bipolar disorder, and the fact that we were both recent converts to the same faith. In addition to this, we were both socially and politically progressive Democrats. It can be a bit lonely to be one if you belong to our religious faith, because most other adherents either were already socially and politically conservative, or they adopted conservative beliefs after joining the faith. Anyway, in September of 2004, I was instant messaged by an online friend of Shannon's, Larry. Both Shannon and Larry lived on the southeastern side of the country, in separate states. So Larry and I lived on opposite sides of the country, and that's why I ultimately never got the police involved. I'll explain some more of this later. I was surprised that he contacted me, but we hit it off pretty quickly. He too was a social and political progressive in our faith. And I was open to meeting more people like that because there weren't that many of us. Soon, I made my first mistake. I had mentioned I was planning to start a distro with zines and other goodies. He suggested brainstorming with me and helping me get it off the ground. He asked for my phone number so we could discuss it over the phone sometime. And much to my deep frustration, I gave it to him. I expected him to call at some other time, and we would discuss some ideas. But when I got offline, not much longer after that, to do stuff in my living room, the phone rang, and it was him. He wasn't calling to discuss the distro. He was calling to chat. And the conversation somehow made me deeply uncomfortable in ways I couldn't explain. I decided I didn't want to talk to him on the phone again. Back then, I didn't handle bad situations very well, and I wasn't as educated on what stalking is, or that creepy behavior doesn't have to be tolerated. So what I did was just never answer the phone again when he called. He called at least 20 times over the first year or so of this, and this despite me never picking up the phone. Despite the discomfort over the phone, I felt it was still worth it to be friends online, so I continued to talk with him in IMs. Sometimes we'd also do group IMs with Shannon, or with Larry's online friend Emma, who also had a similar religious and political background. Two patterns soon emerged. One, I had the feeling he was researching me. One thing that wasn't about me directly but still weirded me out was all of a sudden he was an expert on the political environment where I lived. Initially, I thought this was due to him being obsessed with politics, rather than being obsessed with me. I now think it was a combination of both. Second, he began monopolizing my time. The second I got online, he would IM me, and he'd want to talk for hours. I found it hard to excuse myself from conversations because he'd find a way to keep talking. He got so demanding that it got to the point that I started trying to keep my computer turned on as long as possible with my IM software set to make my username invisible to Larry, so that I could try and do what I wanted online, or talk to my other online friends without him sucking up all my time and energy. By the way, the phone calls from him were still coming at this point. I remember this one occasion when I was in group IMs with him and Emma, and he was droning on in one of his prayer sessions, when I was accidentally knocked offline. It so happened that I had wanted to see something about my favorite band on TV, and would have had a hell of a time excusing myself to go watch it. So when I got knocked offline, I decided to just go enjoy the program and get back online later. While I was watching the program, the phone rang. It was him calling long distance, wanting to know what happened. I also remember once being in another awkward group I am with him and Emma, where he was railing about the fact that his wife Maddie was a oneness Pentecostal, which he considered heretical. When he walked away from his computer and she saw it, she put me and Emma on blast for being there while he criticized her faith. So with him monopolizing my time and me not having the tools or the education to quite realize what was happening, I only knew I was deeply uncomfortable. I didn't know how to handle the situation, but I wanted my time and my energy back, so I decided to cut contact without telling him. I blocked him from Instant Messenger. I blocked his email address, and I started distancing myself from LiveJournal, which is where I met Shannon initially. He freaked the fuck out. He started calling several times a day, and when I blocked his email addresses, he'd get a new one and contact me with it. I felt unnerved and fearful. And by October 31st, 2004, I was deeply depressed. I'd gone to my church's Harvest Festival thingy, but I just sat there and stared at my foot. For the next month or so, until about December 8th, I was barely eating or sleeping. Food made me throw up. I wouldn't leave the house. When I went to the doctor in January, I'd lost so much weight that after the appointment my pants actually started to fall down when I tried walking to the bus stop. He was persistent all this time, with unwanted calls and emails. Christmas Day 2004, he used yet another email address to tell me that Maddie was in the hospital and to pray for her. I thought, you asshole, you should be with her instead of bothering me. Most of his phone calls or emails included a request that I pray for him. So that's how things initially got started. This went on for 7 years in total, off and on. I think psychologically the worst part of this for me was that there would be periods when he would leave me alone, sometimes days, weeks, or months. And then, just as soon as I thought to myself, or dared say out loud to someone else that, hey, maybe this is finally over, he would contact me again. It made me quite paranoid because it was almost as if he knew, somehow, that I was letting my guard down a little. I desperately just wanted him to forget about me, but it was clear he hadn't. In later years, I resumed some contact. I think it was when he got a MySpace. I thought maybe if I held him at arm's length by letting him send PMs to my MySpace account, but having some excuse for not using an instant messenger, it would be good enough. I feel that worked for a while, but in 2011, something must have happened in his life and marriage. Maddie left him, and according to him, she was accusing him of sexually assaulting her niece, though he said it was lies. Same as the claims made against him of sexual harassment in college, or lies made up by some girls he knew in revenge because he left a campus evangelical organization that was cultish in nature. One day I logged into MySpace to see he'd PM'd me. It was sexually explicit, which scared me because prior to this he'd always played the role of Big Brother in Christ, even while engaging in completely inappropriate behavior. So now it looked like the mask had slipped. His profile on the site was now completely bizarre and fucked up. I was scared he'd had a psychotic break. It was suggested to me to report him to MySpace. Nothing happened, although a caring friend also reported his account out of concern for me. As I said earlier, ultimately I never called the police. This was because A, he lived on the other side of the country from me, and B, as Shannon pointed out to me, he had chronic employment issues, so it didn't seem likely, offhand, that he'd show up here in my hometown. However, I always considered bringing in the police to be something on the table for one very important reason. Perhaps I should have explained this earlier in my post, but remember Emma, Larry's online friend? In the little bit of one-on-one talking time with her, I had soon discovered that not only did she grow up a few miles away from me, we both still lived in the same county where we grew up, and she knew Brigham. A good friend of mine from high school, who I ended up dating briefly in 2007, during one of the periods where Larry was leaving me alone. Because she'd been raised LDS, and she and Brigham had attended Mormon youth stuff together when we were all in high school. She became a Pentecostal after high school. Brigham is still Mormon. I was afraid on some level that because Larry had a connection to my hometown, and even to my real friends through Emma, that he had an advantage already if he wanted to show up here and harm me, in addition to having the possibility of calling the police on the table. I also weighed whether to tell Brigham about this situation and Emma's involvement in it. I decided not to tell him. Sometime later, after the insanity, Larry sent another PM claiming Maddie or someone on her behalf had hacked his MySpace account and wreaked havoc with it. I don't know whether to believe that or not. Could be true, could be false. In any event, eventually I abandoned MySpace like everyone else, and he either never found my Facebook account or has wisely decided not to approach me there. It's been about 3 to 4 years without any contact from him, and I am finally about 95% convinced that it's over. It had some real negative effects on my life. I was always socially awkward, and even afraid of people because of my childhood. And when I had first joined the church, I had tried to push myself to talk to people and be more social. That stopped, and I had been in a deep depression for most of the 7 years of this. I ended up coming to the conclusion that my particular church and faith are not healthy for people who struggle with mental illness, and I left the church first, and then evangelicalism altogether shortly after. Certainly the shock of someone using my faith as an in to abuse me for years was also a motivation to leave the religion too. It's taken quite a bit of work to get myself to the point where I was socially before this started. Instead of trying to improve my social skills within church, I'm doing it at college. and I still don't trust anyone enough to give a guy my phone number after only meeting him one time, unfortunately. Larry, let's never meet. This all happened when I was in high school in the late 90s. I grew up in a rural western town. That meant not much to do in town, but lots of places out in the heavily wooded canyons and hills right outside of town. One particularly popular spot for hanging out, hiking, rock climbing, and doing various other things is called Falling Rock. It's right along the rim of Dark Canyon, already spooky sounding enough, and features pine woods going from a highway straight out to a sharp, abrupt drop down a sandstone limestone cliff. It's several hundred feet down to the creek at the bottom, and there are various hiking trails and ways to get around the cliffs and down to the creek. I went there frequently with friends in high school, not to smoke weed or drink or whatever, but because the place was also held as sacred by the Lakota, and by proxy, by teenage wannabe Wiccans like me. We'd see their red prayer bundles up in the cedars along the cliffs, and to me and my coven of fellow dumbasses, that made this an obvious place to visit and try to contact spirits and whatnot. I hiked it enough to become very familiar with the area, especially with the deep overhang that was almost like a shallow cave. It wasn't visible from the top of the cliff, or from the main hiking trails. I only learned about it after someone else showed me how to get to it, by scooting down a steep incline between two particular pine trees, on my butt. Also during this very confused time of my life, I had a best friend who was an extremely bad influence, and who kept getting me involved with older guys. At 15, I lost my virginity to a 22-year-old guy in the Air Force that she had introduced me to, and then left me alone with. I won't say he made me do anything, but I also won't say I was entirely on board with everything that happened. She later gave me away for a night to a Turkish guy who spoke no English. Then, she started seeing a guy in his early 20s, she was 18, and more or less told his 40-something uncle that I was all his if he wanted me. I was a 16-year-old dumbass. Didn't know about this scheme. Just knew my best friend had invited me up to Falling Rock to hang out with her and her boyfriend. I was less happy when I showed up and found the uncle there. I'd met him before. He wasn't a dick or unattractive. Actually, he was quite attractive, or even especially creepy. It was just knowing he was more than twice my age and very clearly wanted much more than the Air Force guy had. He didn't just want sex. He was in love with me and wanted me to love him too. I knew it. I just didn't know what the fuck to do about it. But I did tell my friend I didn't want to see him around when she and I got together. She apparently ignored that bit of what I said. He and my best friend's boyfriend were both cowboys, following the rodeo circuit. As such, they showed up at Falling Rock in their boots and hats and all that, and it made them slow. My friend was morbidly obese, and none of them knew anything about Falling Rock, whereas I knew the whole area very well. I had driven my own vehicle there, but had parked in the lower lot, about a quarter mile closer to the highway than the place where they parked theirs. When I saw the uncle was there and he started getting overly friendly right away, I planned to get away as soon as possible. We started walking, and it wasn't long before I got way ahead of them, ignored their calls to come back, and vanished into the woods down one of the less used hiking paths. This was broad daylight, and I had a plan. I was going to just slip around to the northwest, through the thick woods, and come back up the lower parking lot, get in my car and drive away and let my friend explain why she'd brought the uncle later. I made good time, and got back up the woods towards the road to the main parking area where my friend and the uncle had parked. I was almost there when I saw another guy, close to the uncle in age, but slimmer, blonde, with a beard and a camouflage coat on, come up the trail from the parking area. We were a few hundred yards from each other, but he stopped, clearly seeing me. I don't know what it was, but I didn't like something about his stance, his expression. I don't know what. I started to slink back down the draw I had come up, and he started to follow me. No mistake about it, he turned off a well-worn, obvious path to the falling rock cliff face to follow me, a little teenage girl, down into nothing but deer trails and scrub and cacti. He didn't say anything all the while. It seemed like he was trying to be as quiet as possible. I knew the area better than he did, though, and was a lot less cautious about my footing. I got back up to the top of the cliffs as quick as I could, and popped up just ahead of where the uncle was sauntering along the edge, right next to where the big overhang would be. The uncle and I saw each other. I pointed back down the trail where the strange guy with the beard could clearly be heard stomping up behind me, and then I dropped down on my ass and boot-scooted right out of sight. I got into the overhang, and heard over my head this exchange between the uncle and bearded guy. "Hey, what the hell you think you're doing?" asks the uncle, sounding absolutely pissed. "I'm looking for my girlfriend. She just came up here. Dark hair," says the other guy. "Oh yeah? What color shirt she wearing?" I was wearing a grey hoodie with my dad's college logo on it. "Gray," says "fuck state," called the bearded guy. The uncle proceeded to go absolutely batshit, yelling and cursing, and based on the noise, throwing fallen tree limbs at the other guy. The other guy just ran. I could hear him thumping and crashing down the steep hillside, not far from me. My friend's boyfriend came running when he heard all the noise, and I could hear him yelling at the guy too. All kinds of vile shit you wouldn't think a good Christian boy would say. The uncle called my name for a bit before I finally came out of the cave. And then my fat friend finally joined us too. It was a weird day to have your sort of stalker save you from someone who seemed to really have it out for you. But I'm pretty sure that's just what he did. I wish I could say I did something better by him, but all I really did was disappear. I didn't talk to my friend for over a year, long enough for her to have dumped her boyfriend and for the uncle to go away with him. I don't know what's happened to either of them, or if I could even recognize them now that I'm twice the age I was then. I do wish them well. I just hope not to meet, our history considering. Still, I'd rather meet the uncle who was always a gentleman than the blonde bearded guy I saw that day. Yeah, let's not meet.